Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Kimberly Harris from Women's HQ, and welcome to the Survivors Coffee Circle. And my today's guest is Mr. Adam LaRose. He is from the Public Affairs for the Capital Area Food Bank, and we are elated to have you here today. Welcome, Adam.
Thank you for having me.
Space.
Thank you.
So, Happy New Year to you.
Happy New Year. It's good to see you, Kim.
It's good. It's always good to have
As
you.
always.
Always a pleasure.
Always refreshing. 2023.
2023. So what's going on in CLC? That's what I want to know.
It's a busy time at the food bank.
Okay.
And, it's a busy time altogether. But I guess, Client Leadership Council on the topic today.
Okay.
So for the viewers and folks at home, the food bank, we serve the state of Maryland, the District of Columbia, and of course, Northern Virginia. And really, the Client Leadership Council is a 10-month advocacy training program where we put 24 of our clients through it every year.
Okay.
We pay them a living wage stipend for their time. And the idea is really that, as a food bank, we have long taken steps to listen to the voices of our clients and help it guide us in what we do. And we, advocate and interact with communities and elected officials and stakeholders throughout the region. But we wanted to really formalize and codify what that looks like at the food bank, really in the on and beginning phases of the pandemic. Seeing the inequities and disparities worsen, we said to ourselves that we need to take those steps to formally do this. And so you, Kim, were a part of the
first inaugural
Client Leadership Council class.
CLC, yes, I was.
And we were honored to have you, of course.
Thank
you. So we launched in October 2020, and we had about 24 folks, including yourself,
during the height of the pandemic,
in the midst of the pandemic. Yep.
Yes,
that was quite an experience.
Yes, it was.
I don't know if you remember the first convening that we held in the Prince George's County warehouse.
In the warehouse.
Yeah.
Yes.
We had to socially distance. We had the warehouse doors open.
And we still made it, right?
We still made it
possible.
Yeah.
And we made it available and open to people to come in and tell their stories.
Right. Yeah, and that's really the idea. People like myself have been talking about the issue of hunger for decades and decades. And our theory at the food bank, and my theory as kind of the director of government affairs of the food bank, is that people like myself have to step back. And if we're really going to have systemic, institutional, holistic change, it's going to be on the waves and heels of folks who have the lived experience, who can speak to the issues and the problems a lot more intimately and familiarly than myself or anyone else, right? And so the real kind of power and idea of the CLC is that we help to further lift out that story, that self-narrative where there's so much emotion and perspective and experience. And the goal is to build that out in a really holistic way. We have a workbook, we have a curriculum, and then this third class that we have going right now. I tell folks it's the most sophisticated training team yet. We have professors, we have experts, we have community organizers. And the idea is that we will help them build out that story and really find the power in it. Because so much of the systems and the institutions, if you think about it, is designed to put people down, think that they're lesser than, to think that their circumstances and where they find themselves, whether they're struggling with domestic violence, being a survivor of that, or housing issues, or healthcare, or transit, or trauma, or whatever it may be.
Right.
Our systems, institutions are really, if you think about it, designed to make people come to the conclusion that it is their fault, right? So much of the training is about getting people to try and push them in the direction of, we didn't ask as human beings to put in the circumstances that we are,
That's right.
And so once we come back and we say to ourselves, like, this isn't my fault. This is a system and institution that is putting us in these places, right? Whatever that may be. Mm-hmm. And there's story in that grief and that struggle and that grind. And when we hone in on it, the goal is to build that out in what we call the 3 Ps, which are policy, press, and programming. And so on the policy side, as you know, we support folks with their policy endeavors. I mean, you got to advocate for the second annual ever White House Conference on Hunger. And, we were really happy to see you be next to Congressman Jim McGovern and Senator Booker and Ayanna Pressley and a host of folks. And that's just one example.
And your CEO.
And Rada, of course. And that's just one small example of, and you saw it in the class, you've seen it in graduates, you've seen it in what they've done, and we've had folks to go on to found nonprofits, to start podcasts. I wouldn't be surprised if at some point we in the next 5 years we'd see somebody who has graduated from the program who will run for public office. So that's the policy side, right? Leveraging that lived experience to say, here's the problem that I saw firsthand, and I saw or I still deal with, and then turning that into a petition for change at local and state levels, particularly. And then on the press side, we work very consistently and closely with our marketing communications team to say, as we as a food bank and as an advocacy department are understanding the stories of these members in the program, we're working on the marketing communication team to always say and keep a lookout for stories that can be pitched or solicited to and from the press to make sure that that's lifted up in broader public consumption. So, we have had folks in Good Morning America and MSNBC,
ABC News, Nightline. Mm-hmm. And let me ask you this: how does the CLC help with driving the mission of the food bank to communities worldwide? Because I know you're connected under the umbrella of the big, the powerful,
Feeding America.
Feeding America. Yep. And you're with being in government affairs, you're in this limelight of congressional, networking all the time.
Yeah.
Bipartisanship, I know. But always networking with Capitol Hill to make sure that we have, their ears to hear out the advocacy of your CLC members.
Yeah.
So tell us about that.
No, it's a fantastic question, and I think we as an organization have to, in addition to trying to build out these stories to influence elected officials and donors and so many stakeholders that have a role in this, we also have to take a step back and listen ourselves, right? And so one of the ways that we do that, to your question, is when we release an annual policy agenda every year, and we meet with advocates and think tanks, and we've also added clients in the CLC to that mix, in addition to our own staff, right? And we say, here's what we're thinking we're going to focus on as an organization to prioritize where we'll have the biggest impact at all three levels of government in all three states that we serve. But what do you think about that, right? And so actually in our first policy agenda, the CLC, and you may remember this, when we asked this question in DC, they were all the folks said grocery access is a problem. We want and deserve access to a reasonable, affordable, healthy grocery store. And so we took that to heart and we started to dig in. And what we found is that, and I don't want to get too much into the weeds, but there's a program in DC called the Qualified Supermarket Tax Incentive Program. And essentially, long story short, is it was designed and created about 10 or 12 years ago to push grocery stores to set up shop in places where they wouldn't set up shop usually. And largely that's in low-income communities of color, right? Which is why you only see one or two or three grocery stores in Ward 7 and 8.
That's right.
Right? So we worked with the mayor and the Department of Economic Development to create the Food Access Fund, which has been in place now for about 2 years.
Okay.
And that has been the reason why the mayor has set up about 15 access points, 2 of which are grocery stores, right? So that was a real kind of anecdote and powerful story of like, we listened to the voices of our clients. While we had programming really dedicated towards grocery access, from an advocacy standpoint, we hadn't really thought about it in that way. And in hearing that, it really pushed us in that direction, and it put it at the top of our priority list. You know what I mean? So there's a policy side, but there's also the programming aspect. So as you all know, clients are going to have ongoing opportunities to solicit and put in feedback into how we operate as a food bank, And there's countless examples of us adding menu options and choosing certain sites and changing how we serve and conduct ourselves as an organization. But I think there's even if you scale back or scale up from the regional impact, to your point about the country and really the world, we have shared our model and our curriculum, the workbook in 2 different languages. We wrote a how-to guide, launch a CLC program, different kind of things like this with news coverage and press and media, in order to guide other organizations on how to create and replicate what we've done at the food bank.
Oh, wow.
And so, the goal is to really do it here in our region and to build a movement and leadership pipeline. But the reality is that we can do that in this area, but we have to do it in our country. You know what I mean? And so that's been beautiful. Just this morning, we had a conversation with a lady from Harvard who was really interested in our model and was consulting an organization in New York on how to do so. And we do that. She asked us how often we do that. And I said, we probably do these about 2 a month, I would say. Okay. And so, because we're all, while we have our region, we're also part of this movement, and that's how I view it. And if people can take what we've learned in the last 3.5 years, because the pandemic has been on an accelerated course,
Yes, it has. Yes, it has.
And so that's a part of it as well, before, and I'll just say one more thing, Cam, on this, which is, if you would have asked me before the pandemic what I think it would take to change really systemic institutional structural issues in the United States, at the time I would have said some major global calamity, to really have people look inward and say, wow, there are some fundamental structural things that we need to get right as a country, right? COVID-19 happened, and we're still seeing a lot of this. I think Congress had made some really good steps and investments and had some really innovative policy solutions that I was really impressed with, but these structural issues are still there.
Yeah.
So now my new theory, because the other one has been disproven, is it's going to take a movement of people who have this lived experience, who live this, to do all they can to change the tenor, the tone, the message, and hold people accountable.
That's right.
And that's really what it's about.
And it's not, it's not one particular issue. All the issues impact the core of hunger, right? And being at that White House conference made it very clear. The president's commitment was to end hunger in 2030.
Yeah.
That is his national strategy plan. That is what we're going to go by and support. But with that, and with the opportunity to now have full classes, speed ahead, you also are doing these creative movements with food trucks?
Yeah, a lot going on. Yeah. So, what's so brilliant about, I think, there's an old wave and an old way to do food banking, and there's a new way to do food banking. And what I love working about at the food bank and working under such a visionary leader like Rada is that we're in that new wave and new approach to food banking. With the recognition, again, it's like we've been handing out food, and that's our bread and butter for decades, literally 42 years now, right? Almost 43 years here on Martin Luther King's birthday. But I personally would love if I didn't have to have this kind of job, because that meant that people don't need our services, right?
That's right.
And so, we're getting to a place where we have to think a lot more innovatively about these issues and how we advocate and how we serve, right? To shorten the line, but also be more thoughtful in how we meet people where they are, meet them on a path to self-sufficiency, and what we think of at the food bank of brighter futures, right? So we have a grocery truck called Curbside Groceries that goes to Ward 7 and 8. I don't know if you saw Good Food Markets closing, but we are setting up shop there 3 days a week to help with.
Okay, that's awesome.
So it sucks that the market is closed, but it's great that the mayor's team called upon us to help play a role in the community. And so healthy, affordable groceries come to people in their neighborhoods. We also have a truck now in Prince George's County, but it's a more innovative way to meet people where they're at, make it easier for them to get the food that they need so they can focus on things like healthcare and work and childcare and education and whatever it may be. And we also have a truck in Prince George's County now. I think I mentioned that. And we have a ton of pilots that we're working on, food pharmacies, working with low-income women on Medicaid, giving them basically pharmacy prescriptions, both pre and post pregnancy, and then tracking their outcomes. So, it's so many different ways that we're thinking about it to add to our kind of bucket of things that we offer. So we'll get at the problem today, but affect people in the long run so that, again, like the goal is to really put ourselves out of business.
And the innovative approaches are always the best, right?
Yeah.
It keeps all of our minds focused on let's move forward, but let's move efficient, because there's just an array of issues that are barriers for many people out here that are experiencing hunger,
Right.
right? So, talk a little bit about the innovative side to Capital Area Food Bank. You mentioned most of it, but tell us what keeps you guys motivated.
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I think we have such a visionary leader for one, you know.
Right.
Yeah, the brighter futures approach to food bank. I mean, you know, taking an organization and really shifting how they view their work is a key step in that process. You know what I mean? And what I love about the food bank is that you're surrounded with people who are smart and talented, but also have the mission and the work at heart. And I think everybody carries it in a heavy way, but in a healthily heavy way, that they know that what we do in this minute, in this day, in this meeting has implications for how we serve and the people that we are working with in those communities who are struggling, right? And it's very palpable and it's very present, and people hold each other accountable, and it's beautiful in that way, right?
That's right.
And so, you know, the pandemic, I mean, as it was with most social service organizations and, you know, frontline careers, was very hard on the food bank. I mean, we had to expand our warehouse operations by nearly 80% across 3 different states. I mean, our staff had to blossom quite a bit. You know, our food purchasing went up exponentially. We're dealing with global supply chain issues and food shortages, you know, all while trying to figure out how we serve the communities that we have to be around and with in the midst of a global pandemic, you know. And so I think there's also this idea that, you know, frankly, we've had to work really hard over the last almost 3 years now. And we've gotten to a place where we understand the pulse, the heartbeat of what this presents, controlling for the uncertainties, but we also have to take care of ourselves as well.
That's right.
You know, and creating that space for us. And so I think the leadership team has done a really good job of creating that space, slowing things down a little bit, because we were very wound up in the day-to-day, emergency after emergency, frontline response after frontline response. And so keeping it present, keeping it there. And I think one of the beautiful things about the CLC is I don't think of it just as an advocacy program. I think of it as a food bank program. While it's in my department, right? Everybody has a role, you know. Rade is excellent in selling the vision to donors and to our board. We have a marketing communication team who helps facilitate and prep, you know, folks for press and media opportunities. Really brilliant to really sell the power and the narrative to other clients who are interested in the program throughout the region for recruitment purposes. And those stories, you know, like they keep me moving. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
What I tell folks is that, you know, there's so many anecdotes I could share. You know, I mean, your story is just one, like I said, but now I don't know if you're Kim, but in the first class, there was, for us, it's about getting to know folks and seeing what they're struggling with in real time. And while we have our eyes on the prize, which is folks being empowered to affect systemic and legislative and institutional change, it's really hard for me to ask somebody to call their legislator or have a press and media event if they literally don't have a roof over their heads.
That's right.
You know, or they can't afford their insulin, you know, or they're going to be evicted, or they don't know where their kids are going to be, you know, like. And so it's that kind of balance, but that balance of that realistic nature of what they're dealing with keeps me humble and thinking to myself, like, sure, like this can be hard and the work can be demanding, but that's why I'm here.
That's right.
And it's because, and it's even my own personal story. And as you know, Kim, like I grew up waiting in line for food. I grew up on these programs and I carry it with me. And so it's very real to me. And I'm not shy about that either. I'm not shy on that with the CLC. Also mindful to give space, but that's what moves me. And to kind of, you know, finish on that question, it's just, I think it's always very present, and we do a very good job of keeping the work and the people at the center, you know.
We, during the first class, we were blessed to have one of the participants. Don't quite remember her name, but she was the one that was able to go do a live Zoom with President Biden.
Jocelyn. Yep.
If the audience could have seen, witnessed how powerful her story was,
right,
and how engaged President Biden was with her.
100%.
They were just talking like,
and we have the link friends. We could share.
We would love to do that on our platform. Jocelyn gave it everything she had. Again, a person with lived experience,
Right.
a part of a CLC committee that was very vocal about advocacy, but was very focused
Yeah.
on the mission.
100%.
And of course, it was something to witness personally, because I love the fact that President Biden just came on a Zoom call,
Right.
and just like, heard someone who had lived experience share their story with
Yeah.
him.
Right.
And like, it was just heartwarming,
Yeah.
Tell us more about that.
Yeah.
Like how your department, you leading the way here. How does your department go forward and enhance that one? Because that was awesome.
I mean, that was one of the proudest moments of my career, honestly. Like seeing Jocelyn grow, and it was funny because we just talked to somebody this morning, and I told this same exact story about Jocelyn. I mean, her story was she has a disabled. Her husband has now passed, actually, but it was really abrupt. But he served in the military for a long time, and he was fully disabled, and all those things. And I remember us coaching her through it, and then the White House team going to her house and her keeping us in the loop. But I'll never forget the phone call when she called me afterwards. And the jubilation and the excitement and the energy. And I think it's also beautiful whenever you have someone who's in that such powerful position, who has the humility and even the awareness to talk to a woman like Jocelyn and just like congratulate her and thank her and her family and her husband for their military service.
Yes.
To connect their team with her on VA issues. You know what I mean? And so it was a lot about the issues, but it was about, I think, that moment in the class, and I know everybody really remembers this, but it was kind of shocking. And it was almost illuminating to everybody, even to me. I was like, wow, like, this can happen. Not that I didn't believe in it, but I was like, I didn't think Joe Biden would come calling for the first class. You know what I mean? So, and then we had Kamala Harris. We have, obviously, Congressman McGovern. Feeding America has taken real interest in the program. And, we poured our heart and soul into it. And I think it's the most beautiful part about it when people like Jocelyn can pour their heart and soul into what they know and they've lived and they've breathed. And then people at those tables who care and can hear it and consume it can actually make a difference in the lives of the issues that they speak to, And so it's hard to replicate that, you know what I mean? Like a conversation with the president, but that's the standard. And I think it's a motive and a motivation for everybody in the class and the identity of the standard.
It just goes to show that politicians don't know everything.
Right.
Like, you do have to come and, in a professional, forceful way.
Right.
You got to kind of like open up and tell your story. I always say, people are like, why would you tell people that, you're a domestic violence survivor?
Right.
Why would you tell people you used to live in a homeless shelter? Why would you tell people this thing? It's because my story can elevate someone else to tell their story. And then it's paid forward.
Right.
And then we come back to the same issue of how do we get people, whether they domestic violence survivors, sexual assault survivors, military, ex-military that have experienced trauma, anybody in the circle that's hungry.
Yeah.
How do we get them now organized? And your model of the CLC, how do we get them organized, get in place? How do you go about recruitment? How do you do all this?
Yeah, I mean, it's an endeavor. We have to be very thoughtful about, because our region is so expansive, right, and so diverse. And so one of the real benefits of having such kind of history and standing in the community is we have over 400 partner agencies, soup kitchens, schools, churches, homeless shelters, you name it. We are the main provider of their, emergency food that they get. We have great relationships with them. And so we get the word out through them, really, right? We put our recruitment flyers in various languages in food boxes. We have folks on the ground in community markets all throughout the region who are talking about the CLC. And as you know, we have Sybil, who's our new community organizer, who's kind of, taking the lead. But in addition to that, I mean, there are certain demographics that we have difficulties recruiting from, especially particularly men. For some reason, that's a difficult one. And veterans, I would say, and then also undocumented and mixed status immigrant households.
Yes.
And so we have to do even more outside of that to kind of identify social service organizations who may not be our partners, but who work with these populations to say, here's the CLC, here's what we do, here's the benefit, which one of the main things being, I think, which gets buy-in from both the organizations, but also the potential CLC members themselves, is the living wage stipend.
Yeah.
I don't know if you know this, but we actually have increased the living wage stipend from the first class.
Oh, wow.
So it was $100 a month, and now we give them $150 a month. So,
okay.
That's almost a token to demonstrate that we care, we're invested, and we mean business, and we value your time and your energy and your effort, right? And I think everybody notices that. And then we go through a really comprehensive recruitment process. There's 3 steps in the process. We have multiple members of the food bank on my team and otherwise who take part in scoring the applications and, the power of their story, how willing they are to share, how comfortable they are to share. Yeah. Not to say that we need people who aren't comfortable, because a part of that, as we all know, is getting people to that comfortability. But it's becoming a very competitive application process as people understand and see how invested and committed we are. Because that was really the whole first class, if you think about it, right? It's like building that trust, I don't expect someone, to get some random call from Adam and be like, oh, let me tell Scott my life story, and let me give him my social security number so he can give me this living wage stipend. You know what I mean? So it takes time to build that rapport and that trust.
Yeah.
And who better to do that than the members themselves? You know what I mean? And so the word of mouth from the members. So ever since the first class, we've had at least 2 members who have in new classes who have been recruited by previous member classes, right? Wow. So again, it's that movement building. You know what I mean? And so. I think it's just really focusing in on who we need to fill, where we need to make sure that certain, ages, races, people, places, things are represented in profiles.
Right.
So that, again, I mean, you saw what it looked like in your cohort. And that's one of the most beautiful things is we pulled up and we have them at the food bank or we have them on Zoom calls. I just look at it and I say, wow, this is a real life snapshot of who we serve,
That's right.
And we have to be thoughtful about how we market that across, different places, people, and things. And make sure that people, are represented. And now we're thinking about what we do more so when they graduate, and we're investing time and energy in that process now. Okay. We just secured a relationship with the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation and American University. They're going to be tracking kind of and digging into how we evaluate the long-term outcomes of CLC participants. So it's a step, every class we build a little bit more, we do a little bit more, we change a little bit more. Sybil speaks fluent Spanish. We now have all materials in both English and Spanish. We have translation in real time. Just small steps to really build it out in a very thoughtful, inclusive, equitable way.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
What's next, buddy?
For the CLC?
What's next for CLC? What's next on your agenda as the spearhead director of all this good stuff? Yeah.
Well, CLC is off and running. So we have about 6 more months in this class. Okay. So we'll graduate them in end of June, end of July. One of the things that we're doing now for the CLC, which I'm really excited about, is we're in the early process of trying to see if we can have some kind of almost peripheral mental health support while they're going through their journey. Okay. We've gotten the feedback several times that sharing the story of self and the self-narrative can be very triggering, and rightfully so. And so we're just taking the steps to make sure that we can do that thoughtfully and develop a relationship with an organization that could do this in a very professional, helpful way. So we're always looking at ways to improve the CLC. But as far as the department goes, we're on the cusp of releasing our 3rd annual policy agenda. Okay. We're about to kind of dig into a really cool venture where we'll start to try and tap into the power of advocacy potential into our partner agencies.
Oh, wow.
So seeing who can help build out a coalition to lift up our own, policy priorities.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So, we're at the food bank, we're doing a re-envisioning partner network exercise where we evaluate our partners on a number of different metrics and say, okay, this is a great partner. This is something we're looking for, but 5 years from now, what do we want these partners to be? What are the criteria that we want based on geography or how they serve, who they serve, what they do, right? And one of those dimensions will be advocacy and an ability or willingness to engage in policy reform efforts, right? And that'll be something that we view them on, and something that our community organizer will take the lead on, is just building out that voice even more. Like we have that client aspect, but again, there's also so much more in the partner agencies. Like I said, the soup kitchens, the churches, the schools, the people, the marketplaces, right? Like they have a voice, they have a narrative, and they have an assessment. And I would say it's just taking one more step to holistically build out the power of how we change these things, And I think it's also how we maintain our degree of, perception on likelihood of change, seeing things. I mean, we all get jaded at times, you know what I mean? And that's why I was really, in some ways, so encouraged by the policy improvements that we saw in Congress, because what we had in those 2 or so years will probably go down as one of the most progressive approaches to policy change in my era, I would say, in my lifetime. Hopefully not, but it was beautiful, to see. And we saw it in real time in the effect in lives of our clients, and they spoke to it, right?
That's right.
The SNAP expansion, Medicaid stuff, the earned income tax credit, pandemic EBT. It goes on and on and on.
And we're just experiencing so much trauma because even post-COVID, people are still like, what do I do?
Right.
Like, people had to change careers.
Yeah.
Some had ended careers because they lost their jobs during
100%.
COVID,
Yep.
You guys know that better than anybody, because the need was just great.
Right.
It was really it was really heightened because of the COVID situation, and people were still trying to get back on track from that.
Oh yeah, yeah.
And what so people just think in terms of, when they think about a food bank,
right?
It's like, oh my God, I got to take a little card and go beg somebody for a box of dry food.
Exactly.
There's more than
100%.
that.
Yeah.
Tell us what more there is.
Oh yeah. To give just a really basic example, we essentially call it a nutrition health index at the food bank, and every order that we make, in terms of truckloads of food, we're consistently putting that into the broader kind of inventory of how it shapes out nutritionally for our clients, right?
Okay.
And we have to meet a very high percentage. I think it's 90% of all of our products that come to the food bank have to meet a set of nutrition standards based on our nutrition team, right? And so, we're looking at that every single thing we put out. We're saying to ourselves, like, okay, is this appropriate for someone's health? Is this appropriate to meet their needs? Is it appropriate for their culture? Is it appropriate for their family and their situation? Does it make it easy on them? Are they able to prepare this? Are they able to eat it? Does it work for them, right? And that's really what we're doing organizationally as a food bank. Like the curbside groceries is a prime example. We have kind of implemented an entire youth nutrition strategy, thinking about how we serve folks and families in schools as well.
Oh, wow.
Because, and that was kind of one of the main takeaways from the pandemic, is that, like, schools were
hit hard.
They were hit hard, but also was a focal point for meeting children who need to get their education.
That's right.
And also the families that surround them throughout that endeavor, right? And so have a number of different pilots and programs that we're expanding in that regard. We have a lot going on. It's a busy time. So health equity is on our agenda. We're looking into a lot of food as medicine activities, and like I said, the pilots in that regard are only expanding. We're adding health equity to our policy agenda now, and hopefully bringing on a new team member to focus on that from a policy perspective.
Oh, wow.
So
it's growing every day.
We have our work cut out for us. Rada is, like I said, she's a visionary leader, but she keeps the standard high. She keeps us busy.
But that's what you need. Keep it going.
It is, yeah.
Listen, guys, I love you dearly.
Same, Ken.
I'm so proud of you guys, Capital Area Food Bank, as being a part of you're my family.
Yeah.
I thank you for coming today,
of course,
Adam, and speaking so loudly about CLC. And I love what you guys are doing there, the direction you're going.
Same.
And thanks for your time.
Of course. Well, we love you, Kim.
I love you guys.
Yeah. You're the best.
This is the best guy ever. And thank you all for being with us today on the Survivors Coffee Circle for Women's HQ. Be well.